Greetings, members one and all of the Salivation Nation. Does J.P. Morgan really have all that silver? We're going to explore that question in today's video. We're going to kind of question the norms that we all kind of have come to accept as fact with regards to silver and J.P. Morgan. Most of us have probably heard this, especially in the last year, about J.P. Morgan accumulating a vast amount of silver. In fact, there's several articles out there that talk about this in various different forms in different places here that have pretty much the same information and same charts and data behind it. And that's kind of something that goes and ties back to one name that's done some of the research on this, and that's Theodore Butler. He posted an article around the beginning of 2018 that talks about J.P. Morgan making this huge silver buy under his research organization, the Butler Research Group, and it's quite a compelling story about the holdings of J.P. Morgan. It goes on to say that J.P. Morgan took delivery of 14 million ounces in December 2017. As a matter of fact, and talking about how they remained in the warehouse from which the metal was delivered. It means that J.P. Morgan now holds, as of January 2018, 133 million ounces of silver in COMEX warehouses. And I posted a video earlier on exploring a little bit about this, but wasn't quite completely convinced about the physical holding aspect of it. J.P. Morgan, they're the custodian of the SLV, silver ETFs. Then you have silver futures and silver options that kind of play on that, but don't actually go back to the actual physical silver contracts, which are 5,000 ounces for the large contract and 1,000 ounces for the smaller contract. But nonetheless, it's interesting to see how all of this information plays out, and there's not really, in any of these stories, there's no link to a clear source of physical holdings in this day and age to see, exactly how these things are held out under the CME COMEX group and the like. I'm not really been able to find anything like that. Exploring some of these different articles that talks about it, and there's a lot of great information here, but nothing in here that I see that really nails down the data behind some of these charts. For instance, where is this information stored? How do we know if it's true under the COMEX silver? The COMEX website, the CME group, is kind of cryptic too, and how it lays it out in the holdings of these contracts. And there may be some reasons behind it, but it got me thinking and questioning my own question. Well, maybe it really is there, and maybe for security reasons, privately, there's reasons why you're not able to really just see that, as to their holdings. J.P. Morgan, Chase, and here's their value as a company and everything, but nothing in there that tells us how much silver is in their coffers. And then we look at other articles and explanations, and they go back to Butler's work. It all references Theodore Butler's work and his research. And then I got digging a little bit deeper and found, that the that there is some contradictory evidence here, and I think I even mentioned this in a prior video. Upon looking at this, it's supposed to be, that this particular article here questions it completely. That it's not. They say there's no rational, legitimate market where a market concentration of this supposed magnitude could not result in dramatic upward spike in price. Certainly, if this much silver was ever dumped in the market, rather than supposedly withdrawn from the market, we know what would happen to the price of silver. It would plummet lower. So they're questioning the silver hoard, and this is from 3 years ago. So it's right in the middle of the time when the supposedly J.P. Morgan was accumulating so much silver from 2011 moving forward. And it talks about the explanation of J.P. Morgan's latest gigantic silver fraud and the purpose behind it fraud. Further enlightenment comes from Bill Holter. It says, first, we have an insane situation brewing in COMEX silver. The open interest finally exceeded 200,000 contracts, 1 billion ounces. I believe the only other time this much open interest exists was back in 80 or 81. This makes no sense whatsoever. The price is plumbing to 4-year lows. Open interest has moved to record highs. In other words, we have Mr. Holter reporting a market insanity precisely parallel to what was just noted before this, where J.P. Morgan has purportedly accumulated an extreme long position in the silver market, yet the price has gone down rather than up. And they're questioning, saying that they don't believe that they're accumulating that much silver. It just doesn't make sense with the markets, with the prices going down low. And then I looked and explored a little bit, kind of the same article here from JM Bullion mirrors, except they explain a little bit more about how the SLV silver stockpile is explaining how that works, essentially. And it talks about iShares Delaware Trust and trustees and going through it and how these things can be cashed out. And the only authorized participants published at the time of the writing about the physical silver deposits or withdrawals are done in share baskets representing 500,000 ounces of physical silver bullion. And here's the only ones who can take delivery in this market of that much physical silver. And we see J.P. Morgan securities in there as well. And we take a look at that there, and you can see the ETFs and SLV and their proxies and how much silver bullion does SLV have, with J.P. Morgan being the major holder of that, being the custodian of the SLV, accumulated over 330 million ounces of silver bullion. But it really doesn't give us the connection of where of how that occurs. And we can see through the COMEX reporting here. This reporting was done yesterday, and we can see that through the year, we have J.P. Morgan here. They have the most. It's kind of hard to see in this report because it's just a printout report of their delivery notices. But we can see here of all these different groups going up here, they're the most frequent. Goldman Sachs has some, but for the silver, 5,000 silver future contracts here. And J.P. Morgan securities, consistently over time, are accumulating 2,800 there. But this doesn't tell us what the actual physical markets are. You know, this is SLV ETF paper. And then I saw this article here. And this, I think, is probably the fairest outline that I've ever seen from February 17th. Say J.P. Morgan may be sitting on almost 700 million ounces of physical silver. And they're careful in their language talking about this, about, they're not definitive in their analysis. But they go through here, they talk about the silver market is very small today at $17 an ounce. That was back in February. Those 800 million ounces are worth a paltry $13.6 billion in US dollars, which is around 1/64th the value of Apple if we use Friday's closing price. At the moment, J.P. Morgan, the mega bank that carries the name of the long-dead financier, has more than 130 million ounces of silver registered in COMEX warehouses, but the story could be somewhat more complex. And I think this is fascinating. They kind of go into this level. Bear Stearns was famous for holding a massive short position in the silver futures market, When the investment bank went bust in 2008, JP Morgan took over part of Bear's business. This is where things become a bit more complex, and the data we have to draw on is limited. According to Theodore Butler, who I mentioned earlier, who is a very well-informed silver market analyst, JP Morgan, the modern megabank, may have used its massive paper short position in the silver market and its role as custodian of the SLV ETF to amass a huge amount of physical silver. Mr. Butler goes on to speculate that JP Morgan bought some 150 million ounces of silver in the open market in the form of US and Canadian minted coins in 2013, though some of these assertions are difficult to prove. If all of these ideas are in fact true, JP Morgan is currently sitting on nearly 700 million ounces of silver, as well as a gigantic short position on silver futures. So here's the rub. Mr. Butler's idea is fairly simple, but it would mean the U.S. government agencies charged with regulating commodity markets haven't done their job, to say the least. So that's where I think a good question. I think it would be very difficult for them to really be able to do that without raising some red flags. In short, Mr. Butler alleges that JP Morgan has used its short position in silver futures, and it has never lost money on to keep the price of silver artificially low, which bolsters and solidifies the criticism in the prior article I showed in this article here. So Mr. Butler thinks that 675 million ounces of silver that JP Morgan allegedly controls amounts to around 45% of the silver that exists above ground, which would make JP Morgan the most powerful player in the global silver trade by a wide margin. Of course, if JP Morgan used its short position on silver futures to manipulate the price, while at the same time buying up the commodity they were manipulating, they broke a series of laws. But for JP Morgan, the law is more of a suggestion than a rule, based off the number of fines it has paid over the last decade for financial misdeeds. There's no way to know for sure if JP Morgan is hoarding physical silver, which should demonstrate how shady the Western futures exchanges are in the first place, and also how weak the law is when it comes to money central banks, or central banks, I guess is what they're trying to say. So in other words, the penalties that they need to pay for breaking the law, the benefits of what they're doing far outweigh the penalties, if that's the case, which means that they can certainly manipulate data to make it hard to track, if that's the case, which in turn why people are making these predictions or assumptions that they are accumulating that much. As of Friday's close, it would take 81 ounces of silver to buy an ounce of gold, which given the production ratio of 91, silver would seem undervalued even without a massive clandestine operation to corner the market by one of the most powerful financial institutions in the world. So this author here, Nicholas Say, I think is pretty fair in his assessment, although, as I've mentioned before, I think there's a lot of natural market forces at work with regards to the silver ratio and silver's price. But I still kind of question and have not found through my research, I think I've been relatively thorough. Obviously, I may have missed some, but perhaps some of you may have links to actual data that shows JP Morgan's physical holdings. I've not been able to find any. I've not found any perusing through a Butler Research website, which is actually from where I got this link to the COMEX CME Group delivery report here that we hear for have JP Morgan. It's obvious that they're active, and it's obvious that they're a custodian of SLV, and I'm sure they hold a lot of physical silver. However, there's the adage that we all, how can many of us have a criticism for the markets being manipulated with so much more of the paper, futures, and options and ETFs of silver out there? How much of that is out there compared to the actual physical silver? I believe there's way more paper options than there is paper silver or electronic silver than there is physical silver. So you have that on one end, and on the other end, you've got this claim that J.P. Morgan holds all this physical silver. I just don't. Those two just don't really line up in those. Given the philosophy that we kind of agree that the price is manipulated to a point, because if you believe that J.P. Morgan holds that much physical silver, then that means you have to discount the manipulation claims that believe there's a massive manipulation by these banks if they hold that much physical silver. So post your thoughts below. Just some food for thought, trying to challenge some of the conventional thinking out there. And regardless what it is, it's obvious there's interest in silver by not only the major banks out there, but governments to a point. Governments are buying, India, we're seeing other central governments buying silver, not as much as they are gold, and then we have world mints around the world that obviously mint precious metals, gold and silver coins out there. So anything that I've said does not discount the fact that we should be accumulating physical precious metals. We have our own stacks. We know what we've got. We can count it. We can see it. We can touch it. We can feel it. But in the world of the financial markets and trade, future tradings and the like out there, when you have to rummage through a bunch of different data and reports and PDF websites and links to find the truth, it's difficult. But in the end, we know that the physical silver that we hold in our hands will always be money, and it has been for millennia, and it will always hold value. It will never go to zero. And though the prices are being suppressed as of late, and it's been discouraging for many of us out there who accumulate precious metals, we know in the end that these bottoms that we're seeing in precious metals, well, they're much higher than the bottoms of yesteryear. So be encouraged and accumulate, and we know that whether or not J.P. Morgan is amassing a massive amounts of physical silver is somewhat of a moot point in a sense, because we know in the end the silver we hold will maintain its value in the long term as we accumulate silver on a steady basis. I'd like to extend a multitude of gratitude to you all for watching, and encourage you to please rate, comment, and subscribe.